Hi, welcome to Rocky Mountain Views. I'm your host, Martha Thompson, and today we're joined by Michelle Shaunaman. She's the Community Outreach Liaison for Tessa. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. For those who do not know what Tessa is, let's just make that real clear. What does Tessa do?
So Tessa is the local nonprofit agency that assists and supports survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And we offer a lot of different services around that.
Okay, and what kinds of services does Tessa offer?
Well, I think most people know about our Safe House. It's a place where individuals who are in the worst of the worst domestic violence situations, or if they're in a sexual assault situation where they're fearing reprisals and things like that, where they can go. It's
Okay.
a 36-bed facility, and we're looking
Wow.
to expand because we cover all of El Paso County and Teller County as well, so the whole 4th Judicial District.
That's huge.
Yes.
Okay, that's a huge population.
So another service that a lot of people know about is our crisis line. And that's a line really that anyone can call on and talk to us as far as if it's a friend or a family member who's concerned about the situation and they're not sure what to do, or an individual who themselves, they are in crisis. So other services that we offer would include advocacy, counseling, court support, help with protective orders, things along those lines as well. So really it's an all-encompassing service, and anything that they need assistance with, we'll try our best to help.
That's wonderful. So it's not just something that is for crisis. It's ongoing.
Oh yes, there's ongoing care and support. So we sometimes will have clients who it's years after the fact and they come back and say, you know, I'm kind of dealing with this stuff again. It's all been brought up by this particular issue or life event. So I need to come in and talk to a counselor or be a part of group therapy, things along those lines. So it's for years afterwards as well. It just doesn't have to be right in that crisis moment. And I should mention too that the counseling and the group, well, not the group yet, that's in the works, but counseling itself is one of the things that friends and family members can access as far as if they're dealing with like secondary trauma from what their loved one has gone through.
That's enormous. And having grown up in a violent household, I know that it is not just the individuals that are immediately affected that are hurt. They're everyone who cared about those of us in my family were hurt and affected by it. So that's enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just an individual or a couple's issue. It radiates out into the family. It affects the children. It affects them in school. It affects their peers. It's a community issue.
It is. I think that most people would probably be shocked by the sheer number of people whose lives are affected by this. So let's talk about some of the statistics. How many people in El Paso, and if you happen to know nationally, are affected by domestic violence?
So in southern Colorado, it's 1 in 3 women will be affected by domestic violence in their lifetime. Nationwide, depending on where you get your statistics, it's either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 women will be affected. So our rate is much higher than the national average.
Wow. Now, does that include our military, or is that a separate?
The 1 in 3 number does include our military here in southern Colorado.
Okay, all right. In talking about veterans, do they have any special issues around this, or how many people do you see that are affected by military? Because I know with PTSD, that can manifest in so many different ways. Post-traumatic stress disorder is debilitating. How do you see that show up in El Paso County? Because we have such a showing of military here, and we're so proud of them and want to support them.
Absolutely.
What kind of services do you offer for them?
So I would say about 5% of our clientele are former or active military members. An interesting side note is that about 25% of the perpetrators that we know about are past or present military members.
Really?
Yes, so it's shocking. There's a lot of debate right now as far as if PTSD is something that directly correlates with domestic violence or not. There are some schools of thought that say, yes, this is something that can lend to eventually having a domestic situation in a relationship, and there are other schools of thought that say, no. Ultimately you have this illness that you need to work on, but you make the choice to be violent towards your partner. And I honestly, and I believe Tessa as well, leans towards that school of thought, that violence is really a choice.
That's an incredibly important thing to talk about. And then that would then take me to what are some, because understanding the dynamics behind abuse is, if we can get a handle on that and understand it better, then we can take action. So let's talk about some of the common myths about domestic violence.
So one of the biggest myths that we face on a daily basis is as far as like the whole question of why does she stay? And I think there's a lot of myths in that. Myths that it's easy to get out of a relationship that's abusive, or that for some reason women or men in these situations like the drama of it or the abuse aspect of it, when that's clearly it's not the case.
Okay. That is a common myth. Why is it so difficult for women to get out of that?
There are so many different factors that go into each individual situation. So they might have children with this person, and they might fear, what's going to happen to the children if I leave, if I take them with me? Am I going to be charged with kidnapping? Is there going to be this whole huge court process that the kids are going to have to be drugged through? Things like that. Or they may even be thinking more along personal values and religious lines, and thinking that, kids need a mother and a father to grow up and, function properly and things like that, when that's not necessarily the case. Studies have shown that if children have at least one adult figure in their life who is stable, who takes care of all their needs, then they're likely to go on and be successful and live satisfying lives.
I'm really glad that you said that, because many people will say, well, we're staying together because of the children, and thinking that that is a benefit. From personal experience, I can say that no, it is not better for the children.
Yes.
We need to have positive role models for our kids. And if that kind of damage is being done and kids do not feel safe at home, that's a devastating experience, and can take a lifetime to get over. With other myths, do you find that finances is a key reason for women staying with their abuser?
Yes, finances are huge, whether you find yourself in a low-income situation or a high-income situation. There may be instances where, let's say, one of the partners work and the other partner does not work, and they have limited access to the funds, or they're put on an allowance, or they have to account for every single penny that they spend, and the person in the relationship who's being abusive is really looking and watching all of those different things. They may not even have their name on the account in some situations. And if they do have a job, there's many, many different ways that that abusive partner can take control over that. They could garnish their paycheck. They could be the only one with their name listed on the account. There are just so many different ways that someone can be financially abusive towards another person.
Well, and when you were answering that question, you said something that I think really needs to be addressed. You said whether they're low income or high income, because then that brings us back to another myth.
Yes, that anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. It's not something that's just limited to women of color or people of low socioeconomic status, or even just women. Men can be victims as well.
And what kind of numbers do you see for men? And what kind of help do you offer them? Because at least around the help, I would imagine that is incredibly embarrassing.
Absolutely.
For a man to come forward because of the judgment that they'll receive from society. Culturally, I think that has got to be devastating for a man. So let's talk about that.
So
care for our our brothers here?
So as far as numbers, I don't feel like I can really accurately speak to that because I think it's vastly, vastly underreported for men who are victims of domestic violence as well as sexual assault. That's another thing too. Men can be victims of sexual assault and their perpetrators can be other men or they can be women as well. So as far as statistics, it's really underreported, so I don't think there's a very accurate one out there. As far as the number that we see, I would say we do see a decent amount of men at our facility. Typically they're coming in and their experience has been they're with a female partner who has become really emotionally or verbally abusive towards them. They've ended the relationship and now they are being stalked by that ex of theirs. So they're coming in and looking for help with things like protective orders. And they're also coming in and looking for support. I think that's really, really huge for them to sit down across from someone who says, I understand what you're going through and I believe that this is happening to you, when society at large is saying there's no way that you can be abused by a woman if you're a real man, or there's, you just need to get over it. She couldn't really do anything if she's stalking you. She's just watching you. She's just, following you around and she'll get over it and things like that. So they're not supporting those myths that are out there, and they're really saying to that individual, I believe you, which is so huge when talking to anyone who's been a victim of a crime like this.
Absolutely. I would imagine that there's also concern about even calling the police, calling authorities, because that myth is so powerful that even if they call the police and ask for help, I would think that it's going to be pretty difficult for an officer that shows up, given that most of the calls that they take are a man abusing a woman, to believe them. Do you do any educational outreach with law enforcement at all? Does that happen with Tessa?
We do. A couple of our advocates and our executive director work really closely with law enforcement as far as providing education and technical assistance on matters related to that. But we do have a really great special victims unit as well as domestic violence detectives here in town who understand the issue. But I will say it is still very, very difficult for law enforcement officers to figure out sometimes in the situation who is the victim and who is the perpetrator, because they're really looking just at, when they're on the scene, a snapshot of this relationship, and they may not have time because they have so many calls to go out on to really delve in and see what's the history of this relationship, because there are some situations where the victim may actually strike first and start a confrontation, and that could stem from many, many different things. One of the big things is the cycle of violence. So to break that down really quickly, there's 3 stages, and there's the honeymoon stage, there's the tension building phase, and then there's the battering phase or the explosive phase.
Actually, Michelle, I don't want you to be real quick on this, because this is one of the most important things that you can talk about with us today. How do you even identify some of the symptoms of an abuser long before you find yourself battered and broken? So I don't want you to go fast.
All right.
Let's talk about this.
Okay, so to break down the cycle, like I said, there's the honeymoon phase, there's the tension building phase, and the battering phase.
Okay.
So the honeymoon phase is typically where relationships start. Everything is great, the partner is Mr. or Ms. Wonderful, it's just what you would expect a great relationship to be like. Then slowly over time, things start to happen that might make you uneasy. Maybe it starts out as just some name calling or belittling here and there, kind of as a joke or things like that, but you really feel like it's not a joke. And that is sort of where the tension building phase comes into place. This can take over a period of years, a period of days, a period of months. It really just depends on that individual relationship. So as that tension is building, whether it's emotional, verbal, sexual, physical types of violence, ultimately it's going to move into this phase of the explosion or the battering phase, where it's the worst of the worst, whichever type of abuse is occurring. Again, emotional, physical, sexual, verbal, things like that.
And they're all devastating. And
yes. I never want to make anyone feel like physical abuse is worse than emotional abuse. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, because we have a lot of clients who come in and say to us, bruises, scars, broken bones, those all heal. But the words that were said to me stick with me for so much longer. So we have a lot of clients who actually purport that emotional abuse is worse than the physical abuse that they suffer.
I appreciate you saying that, because I believe that to be true as well.
So going back to the power and control wheel in this explosive phase, after that's done, there's this sort of remorseful, oh honey, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, that'll never happen again, I just have so much stress at my job, and I'll never do it again, I promise. And then it goes back to the honeymoon phase where everything is great.
And flowers and gifts.
Yes.
And lavishing whatever.
And sometimes people in this situation, it can be difficult for them because all relationships have good times and bad times, ups and downs. So they may be thinking, especially if they've witnessed this as a child, this cycle of violence, that this is what's normal and this is what's okay, when in actuality, it's extremely abusive. So tying that back into what I was saying about reporting to the police and a victim who is initiating the situation, whatever it may be, they might be in that tension building phase where they know something is coming and they know it's going to be really bad, so they're going to try to head it off at the pass. They're going to try to get it over with as soon as possible, because that anticipation of what may happen is just so hard to bear. So that may be a situation where they walk in and they think, okay, this person is the perpetrator in the situation because they initiated, when in actuality they're initiating to get whatever they feel was coming up ahead over with sooner. And they will know then when it's happening, instead of that big fear of the unknown.
My degree is in psychology, and one of the first things that I learned is the way that they make lab rats go crazy. And it is by the rat will do the same thing, but they never have the same result. They can't, they don't know what to expect. And it is crazy making. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Because you just don't know, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? What's going to happen to set this off? But you can feel it.
Yes. And you know what? None of that matters. None of what the individual who's being abused in the relationship, what they say or what they do, it never matters. It's just like that situation with the lab rats that you were talking about. It's different every single day, but it's different minute by minute. It's like they're walking on eggshells. That's another thing that we hear clients say all the time. It's like, I'm constantly worried about, what am I going to say? What am I going to wear? Did I do the dishes right? Did I fold his or her clothes right? All of those different things, all those stupid things that no one should have to worry about, that really don't matter in the scheme of things.
It doesn't matter, but that is part of the emotional abuse that you're speaking of. And that stays with the victim long after they escape their abuser. So I really appreciate you addressing that.
I've talked to individuals who have said, years after they've been in a relationship that's abusive, they still do certain things with their partners, like checking in constantly, being like, I'm going to be here at this time and that time, and their partner's like, why are you letting me know all this information? You don't have to do that. You're an individual, go live your life.
Yes.
So I think, it's really refreshing for them to get that perspective of, oh, I guess I don't have to check in. But it is something that sticks with you.
It does stay, and there are other things that have been normalized over time that I'm familiar with, which is women will feel that if their partner is jealous, that is a compliment. Talk about that.
Yes, jealousy is a huge form of manipulation. So I think a lot of society, a lot of the messages we get is that a man should be jealous in situations where another man is looking at his woman or whatever.
Or whatever, fill in the blank.
Yes. So they feel like that is a form of love, because they really want them, they really need them, they're desirable, and they're the only one who wants them.
They care so much.
Yes, they care so much. but that individual will twist it in ways as far as maybe having the victim change their style of dress or how much makeup they wear or things like that, saying, I don't really like how people are looking at you, I'm worried about your safety, maybe you should tone it down a little bit, or, I don't like how your friend is looking at you over there. I think, they want more from you than a friendship. I'm concerned about that. He seems kind of sketchy or she seems kind of sketchy. Maybe you shouldn't hang around them anymore. So in a way, what they're doing is they're starting to isolate that individual, coming across as caring and concerned for that individual's safety, when in actuality, they're trying to keep them away from anyone and everyone who could be a support system for them.
Well, and I would imagine that you also see that aside from jealousy, in isolating them, they are keeping their family away. They are saying that they don't like their friends, so their friends don't get to come over anymore.
Yes.
And those are all potential witnesses.
Absolutely. And they're people who could be sounding boards as well for, is this normal in a relationship or not? So it's really adding to that component of emotional abuse as far as they have no one else to talk about their situation with. I mean, added on top of that is the social stigma of being a victim of violence.
It's humiliating. It is humiliating.
Absolutely. It's so difficult for people to come forward and talk about it. I've seen it with countless individuals that, they just don't want to admit to the fact, whether male or female, because it is so embarrassing and people judge you very, very harshly. So I would just say, if anyone knows someone who is a victim of domestic violence, the first thing that you need to do is make sure you believe them and that you show a non-judgmental demeanor towards them, because that will instantly shut someone down if you're talking to them and you show horror on your face or that you're shocked or upset.
That's great advice. That is great advice. So we go through our phases. We just discuss those. If we do have that person and we want to have an intervention and help them, how is that done safely?
Okay, so there's several different ways that an individual could intervene in a situation like this. You could directly address it. So you could speak directly to whichever individual you know in the relationship, keeping in mind that your own safety is paramount in this situation. Only do what you feel comfortable with, because there are professionals out there who can help with situations like this. But as far as directly intervening, it could simply be something like pulling the individual aside, or if you have a moment to be with that individual who's in the abusive relationship and saying, I'm witnessing some things and I'm concerned about your safety, or I don't like how your partner is treating you or what they said to you. And it can be difficult to bring up, but I know that it's possible because I've done it in my own life with friends. I've had to pull them aside and say, I don't like what's going on in this situation. It seems like he's trying to isolate you by moving you away from your friends and family, and he's expecting a lot of you to quit your degree program and to transfer and do all of these different things. Is this truly what you want? It can just be a simple conversation like that. You don't have to come out and say, I think you're being abused by your partner, you should leave them. That's another point.
Never do what I tell you to do.
Yeah, never say you should leave. Because by saying that, that's another thing that's going to shut them down. Plus, doing the work that I do, we know in our field that it's the most lethal time for a victim when they're leaving their relationship. That's when they're most likely to be severely physically injured or killed. Because these individuals who are abusive will do anything to keep the power and control in their relationship. And that's really what lies at the heart of domestic violence, is one individual is trying to have all of the power and all of the control in their relationship.
When we first met, you had a brilliant idea of how to intervene if it is a stranger, you see something happening. Please share that with our guests. I just love this.
Okay,
it's so smart.
So you can distract. That's one thing that you can do. Let's say you're in a coffee shop, for instance, and you're witnessing two individuals who look like they're in a heated argument. And after you watch the argument for a while, you realize that one of the partners is just being completely overbearing, is in this other person's face. The other person looks like they are afraid and concerned for their safety. Maybe it's just something like you accidentally drop your drink on the floor, and it takes the attention away from that situation. It makes them think about, oh, there are other people in here who can see what I'm doing or what I'm saying. And I think it's one of those ways that you can diffuse it without actually being involved in the situation. But you had mentioned too that if you feel comfortable in going up and talking to the people in the situation, what you could do is you could say something like to the person who's being abusive, oh, I really like that shirt that you're wearing. Where did you get that? That's fabulous. Like you were saying, appeal to their narcissistic side.
Yes.
And then, but in turn, that will make them realize that other people can see them and that they're watching them and that they know what's going on in that situation. So there are several different ways that you can intervene more indirectly by doing things like distracting. Or you could even go up and say something like, oh my gosh, that car out there, it looks like it's being towed. Do you all have, a green pickup truck or something, just anything to make them realize that they're being watched in that situation. But again, safety is always has to be your biggest concern. And you'll get those gut feelings of it's okay to intervene or not. And when you get that feeling that it's not okay for me to directly intervene or distract in a situation, that's a point where you can delegate. And what delegating looks like is, let's say there is a situation that's going on at your apartment complex or in your housing community that you overhear, loud banging, dishes, things being thrown, screaming, and you're concerned. You could call your security if you have security for the area where you live and just say, hey, I'm, hearing these things. It's bothering me. I wonder if there's something going on there. Could you go check that out? That's delegating. Okay. Or you could call the police too if it's something that you have witnessed yourself and you don't want to get involved in it. You can call whomever you think would be a good person who is trained and able to go and intervene in those situations. If you're a child, sadly, domestic type violence in dating situations happens as well.
Definitely.
And so if you are a young adult or a teen and you're witnessing something like this, another option is to go to someone who is a trusted adult and talk to them about that. Whether it's a parent, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a teacher, just anyone that you feel would listen and be able to help in the situation. And if that person doesn't listen, go to the next trusted adult or individual who you feel could intervene. And they could also call an agency like Tessa to come up with more ideas of who can I talk to about this? How can I get help in this situation if they're coming up with roadblocks with trusted adults in their life?
One last thing that I want to talk about around intervention is that having dealt with clients with this issue, I know that it's very dangerous for the victim to have this addressed in public directly, because the abuser may stay perfectly calm in that moment, but when they get home and out of the eyes of public, there can be a tremendous cost. So we have to take that into consideration as well. So there are so many things. How can we learn more? You've got your website. Do you have information on the site? What would you recommend for people who think there might be a problem but want to learn a little bit more about it?
So I would say our website is a good resource, but they can always call our crisis line as well to talk about help with more information or resources. We also provide outreach at Tessa. That's part of my job position. So we go to schools, to local businesses, to church groups, to women's groups, to service groups, and talk about what is domestic violence and the dynamics of it. We also talk about, what is sexual assault and the dynamics, and we also always let anyone who we talk to know about our services and what we can offer and how we can help and how they can be involved as well, like what I was talking about before with the 3 Ds, direct, distract, and delegate.
Well, Tessa does an amazing job
Thank you.
in El Paso County, and you have given us some wonderful advice today. If you're having a problem, if you are in this area, please don't hesitate to call them. And this is nothing to ever be ashamed of. If you're outside of the area, There will be an agency for you to call. You don't need to suffer one more day. Michelle, thank you for being with us today. You've given great information.
Thank you for having me.
And keep up the great work. Until next time, thanks for watching.